What's up? Welcome to Saturday's Warrior, the channel where we talk all things BYU, Big 12. We love talking realignment here. And today we are going to be discussing wrapping up the end of the season for BYU, Big 12, kind of looking at the college conference championship games while Jeff here gets his phone all set up, and the playoff and kind of address some of that. There's been a lot of issues and a lot of topic discussion around all of that. So we're going to be getting into all that before hitting up our picks. Should mention I'm Trevor, and Adam, who's usually with me for these videos, couldn't make it today, but we got another friend. We got Jeff Fuller to come on and speak with us a little bit and share some of his thoughts. Well, Jeff, first of all, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be the scab, the replacement for your missing friend.
Well, you're more than just that. I actually would have loved to have both of you guys on because I wanted to get your thoughts. And if you haven't, you should go find Jeff on Twitter and follow him. He's got a lot of good thoughts, and he's had a lot of thoughts on the playoff and college football right now. And so you should go follow him. I'll make sure to put it in the description. But real quick, what's your handle?
At JJFuller72. I'll be, when we share the screen later, they'll see it in several of my tweets. I'm going to share some of my recent tweets where I'm being the squeaky wheel, whiny Big 12 / BYU fan. And, why are we being dismissed with a good resume? Just not even in the conversation. It's really, it's not cool. I'll just put it that way.
Yes. Yeah. Perfect lead into what we're talking about. Real quick, if you have not already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. It really helps us continue to grow the channel and reach more and more Cougar fans out there to be part of the conversation. So you talked about some of the frustrations, or you just mentioned some of the frustrations around the BYU fans right now. Before we get into the larger college football picture, let's talk a little bit about BYU season. I mean, it just felt like it wasn't always pretty, but man, it just felt like a magical season where no matter what, BYU was finding a way until they came up short a couple times, which just completely kind of burst the bubble on this BYU season. And so how are you feeling here at the end? I mean, it was still, no matter how you slice it, it was still a remarkable season for BYU, certainly finishing well above what any projections had BYU. Even the most optimistic fans seemed to have them at 8 or maybe 9 wins. And that was super optimistic. And now BYU was playing very meaningful games in November. And even though they're not going to make it to the conference championship game, they're not, in all likelihood, let's be honest, they're not going to make it to the playoff. But they're still going to be playing in a much bigger bowl game than they have over the last many, many years. And so
playing in a bowl game at all, 6 wins was going to be the measure of a successful season for this year. The second year in a power conference. And yeah, I mean, a lot of us are like, oh, what could have been? But it's almost like, the team and the coaches are a victim of their own success, starting 9-0 and beating some good teams along the way that turned out to be better wins as the season progressed, especially that SMU win and beating Utah. And then, after that, it seems like a lot of teams that played Utah did pretty bad thereafter. I think Oklahoma State never won another game. I don't know. There's some stink around Utah that their losing ways or lack of offense just seemed to rub off on teams afterwards. But again, absolutely over the moon with how the season turned out. Seeing the playoff within the grasps and dropping the ball at the end. Some people call it just a regression to the mean of, this is sort of what was expected. But I remember in the preseason, in the summer, Spencer Linton was sort of really excoriated on Twitter and laughed to scorn when he said, BYU is probably going to win, could win up to 8 games, and that he thought more of the pressure was on Utah because they had, they were picked to finish first, and boy, the knives came out, and he was just he was put on blast as being an idiot, and boy, he was actually underestimated how well BYU would do. So what a season, even if BYU loses a bowl game, still double-digit wins in a power conference. That's something that's never been accomplished by BYU. Give them their roses, and you cannot be disappointed with this team.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am trying to think optimistically because we did our live reaction after the Houston game, and we were pretty bummed and down, and a lot of the comments were much more positive than I was saying, hey, this was still a great year. And it's true. I mean, we have to count our blessings. Certainly, we moved the goalpost as the year went on, and we kept winning, and we kept saying, okay, well, now we have new goals, new aspirations. And
they made us believe. Why did they make us believe?
Well, after the Oklahoma State game, I was just like, man, BYU and then the Utah game, you watch those moments and you start seeing them. It feels like it could happen again, both against Kansas and Arizona State. It kind of feels like you're coming up to those moments again, and for it to fall short, is just, you get so used to just winning. And, I think, I don't know what happened. I mean, certainly it does seem like BYU ran out of steam a little bit. I don't know if they got distracted buying the hype. I don't know if that was an issue, if they just started getting run down or, depth.
Yeah, some injuries and some depth and injuries, and then just the ball didn't bounce the right way. I mean, both losses, they were single score losses, but both required a freakish special teams turnover. The pooch punt that hit was it Mark Collins in the face, where he didn't even know it was a pooch punt against Kansas. And then, the onside kick, the squib kick that, just hit the guy. Maybe that was the intent, but boy, you got to be an amazing kicker to just blast it right at the guy and hit him right on. People aren't that accurate kicking a football. So there was an element of luck there against Arizona State, in that game. And I was there in the stands for that. But even both those games, they came down to essentially the last play where BYU could have won it, and BYU outgained yardage-wise both those teams. So in both the losses. And if you look at what Arizona State did the game before and the game after, and Kansas did the game before and game after, BYU put up the best fight against those two teams when they were just in their amazing stretches. Again, it was just close enough to be in grasp, and if either one of those games would have gone the other way, boy, would have been amazing. But here we are.
Yeah, and you're right. It did come. There was some luck in those for the other teams in those losses for BYU, but BYU had some luck to win those games. I mean, you could argue. You mean the K-State BYU
earlier
won big, but there were several moments that were luck, and I don't like just putting on luck because, I mean, yes, there's always an element of luck, especially with a ball that bounces really weird, but it's being able to take advantage. It's executing. It's putting plays where your guys are in the right decision, where they know what to do. And so there's still all of that. And at the end of the day, if you're in position to lose a game based on a single play going wrong, then, your BYU shouldn't have been in those positions. And for me, I think that's what hurts more. Like if we had just gone up toe to toe against a team and they just beat us straight up, and you just felt like, man, BYU did everything they could and they just got beat. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like both those games, BYU was not playing their best version of football. And even in a lot of
even still, then they outgained both the teams in yardage. So our defense, offense combination was better than their offense combination. Maybe not on the points put on the board, but in the yards gained, which is a metric. But lost the turnover margin in both those games.
And that's what hurts, is it's just that, man, if BYU could just put together a full game, if they could just, play, and do what they do, like we saw them do against Kansas. I mean, that was a complete game, maybe their only truly complete game of the season. that if they could have just been more consistent, things may have gone differently. So I guess that's the issue, is that BYU had the potential to be in those games and win those games, and that's what hurts when it's like you were saying, it's still within your grasp and you see it slip away. So it was still a special season, but it could have been a super special season. So bummer. But that's what's setting up all the talk now, is that BYU, with as good as the season was, and Kansas, let's talk about Kansas, was on a heck of a run. They lost a very close game against their rival who was ranked. Then they beat Iowa State. Then they beat BYU. And then the next week they went on and beat Colorado. So that was 4 ranked teams. And then they went up against a good Baylor team. But man, they didn't even, if they're going to like screw things up for the conference and hurt all of our ranked teams rankings, they could have at least made it to a bowl game and given us one more bowl eligible team from the Big 12. So that couldn't have gone worse from the Big 12 perspective. But good on Kansas. And then ASU is obviously hot right now too. I wasn't a real believer because of a lot of their wins early in the season looked to be maybe less impressive as the season went on. But they proved that whether, they weren't as good then or not, they're a very good team right now. And so, and so there aren't bad losses, even though Kansas's overall record wasn't great. Like anybody that looks at that says, okay, yeah, we knew Kansas had a lot of talent coming into the season. Took them a while to put it together, but they went on a heck of a run, a little too late. But so anyway, so now with just 2 losses, BYU is not even in the conversation for the playoff. Actually, I want to pull it up because I have it here somewhere with let's see what the overall rankings are here. This is from Fox, both the AP and the CFP. Oops, wrong window. Here, let me zoom in here a little more. And so anyway, we can see both of the sets of rankings, but regardless, either way, BYU has dropped quite a bit, while we see other teams that have similar resumes or less impressive resumes, more losses, worse losses, and they're all sitting in front of BYU, and BYU's not even being considered for an at-large spot. They're not even talked about at all, behind some of these other teams. So what do you make of that? What's going on with that? Why is that happening?
Oh boy. I mean, Clemson. Guess what Clemson's best win of the year was? Against Pitt. It was against Pitt. I think are they 7-5, or I think Pitt's lost 5 straight games.
Well, it was supposed to be a good win at the time because Pitt, I think, was ranked at the time.
Yeah,
but now
we see, Clemson has 3 losses, and their best win is against a team that's nowhere near ranking. They've only beat 1 team with a winning record. How were they 17th? I think there's some of this. Well, this team's in the conference championship game, so let's boost their record a little bit. Maybe there's some of that. Maybe it's just the Clemson brand of having won national titles within the last decade. But come on. How is Clemson above BYU? How is Missouri that high? They got boat raced. They had an easy SEC schedule, and they got boat raced by some not wonderful SEC teams. I think South Carolina that just killed them. Bama destroyed them here in Tuscaloosa, and then of course the Texas A&M. That was like a 42-7. I forget the exact score, but Missouri just has not been competitive in the SEC, and it's one of those where you sort of sneak in. Oh, here's another win against ranked teams that are higher teams can brag about. Sort of Illinois there at 21 by the CFP. But yeah, who got it right? Honestly, there's not tons of difference between the AP and the college football playoff, but there's a little bit of copycatting there.
That's been one of my Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say that's been one of my frustrations is that they always talked about the committee. They weren't just gonna be, like the poll where you see somebody loses, so they have to move down certain space, and then somebody else moves up or whatever. Like they said, oh, we're gonna blow it up each week. We're gonna start fresh, look at it with all the
They
new
didn't
data.
do that
They
at
don't.
all.
They move. They look just like the AP. There's very few differences.
Yep. So, and again, Memphis, they're at 25. One of the things I sent out a tweet about 30 minutes ago, just a couple minutes before we went on the air, about sort of, and this may be a good time to talk about this, but look at where the CFP ranked the 4G5 teams they ranked. Boise at 10th, UNLV at 20th, Army at 24th, and Memphis at 25th. And you could say, oh, there's only 4 teams, and 2 of them are the last 2 spots. And look at where that matches with the AP poll, the exact same spots. I think, I don't know, I think this committee is using the AP poll to give them cover for, over or under ranking teams when, they should be more metric based and more principle based on, in my opinion, on what was really happening. And I don't know if you want to have me share that tweet right
Yeah,
now, if
dude.
you want to pull up my tweet.
Yeah. Here, I'll remove this, and then if you want to get your screen pulled up, and then we'll. Oh, you got
I've
that.
got my screen
That's
pulled up. Do I have to share?
no.
You got it.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's my thing, and I want to talk about is it seems like there has not been any rhyme or reason. There's been lots of contradiction from the CFP talk. It depends on who they're talking about. It really seems they favor big brands, that they really rely on the preseason polls, and there has not been any rhyme or reason. They've contradicted themselves all along the way and sent mixed messages, and also really really just kind of caught themselves in like I was saying, contradictions this whole time. So what are some good ways that they should be thinking about this? And it looks like you got this pulled up, so I'll let
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Massey composite ranking, which,
you.
the more you understand about, statistics and just, biases and such biases, you realize the more data you have, the more entry points, you're gonna get rid of some of your bad outlier data. The current Massey composite rankings that I just pulled up right before currently has 88 different ranking systems. And yeah, it does include the AP, the coaches poll, the CFP. It includes, FPI. It includes a lot of predictive metrics like ESPN's FPI, like the K-Ford ratings, where, some of the predictive ratings are like, well, we sort of care about what you've done, but we also really believe in you because historically you've been good, like, going years back. Or you've got a lot of talent, you've got great players, and so we're going to give you credit of that. ESPN's FPI definitely includes that in their ranking system. How good of players you have, which is like, well, that should be that should have showed on the field, and that should be represented in your resume. If you got the best players, yeah, you should be playing well on the field. And if you're not playing as good as you should, well, we're going to give you a little extra boost because you have those players. Hopefully that rubs people the wrong way, just because those biggest brands, the blue bloods, they already get the benefit of the doubt by starting the season ranked high. They get the benefit of the doubt of when they play well, they have a great eye test, and then they're going to get an extra bonus for having the best recruits. But the Massey composite, yeah, 88 different ranking systems. A lot of them are resume based or efficiency based, along with the other ones. But you're just lumping all the data together. So honestly, I think this is a pretty good way to get a baseline on where teams are. And it sort of passes the smell test in general. Sort of scrolling down here, BYU, I'd love to see them higher at 15th, but again, BYU doesn't do great in a lot of these efficiency metrics because they just couldn't put teams away and blow them out when they had the opportunity to. I mean, there was that opportunity against Baylor, against UCF. against Houston just this last week. I mean, those games shouldn't have been close, and just inability to put teams away. And BYU would have been a few spots higher if they would have blown out a couple teams when it was right there at the offer. So, but
Inability
again,
to,
look,
or unwillingness to. I don't know. Inability. It felt like inability against Baylor, unwillingness to against UCF, and Houston. They just struggled to even get ahead of them for a while. But
freak plays, yeah. I mean, running into each other on the reverse, look like Keystone Cops out there, like in their first game of the season. There's some weirdness going on. But again, here's Boise State in the Massey Composite. They're ranked 16th, 11-1. They're only lost to number 1 Oregon. But I mean, we've if you've been watching football, they have not been putting teams away either. We hear it wasn't this last ranking that came out, but the week before, where they had barely survived at Laramie against Wyoming. And Lord Manuel, the Michigan AD, who's the chair of the committee, he's like, well, we have coaches on our committee who, boy, they've played at Wyoming. They say that's a real tough place to win. So they're not going to punish Boise for barely squeaking out against 2-10 or 3-9 Wyoming team.
right.
I think Wyoming won this last week, so I think they ended 3-9. Beat Washington State. So, and that was on the road. But yeah, Wyoming. I mean, yeah, Arizona State played Wyoming and beat them by like 35 or something. BYU went to Laramie and won by 20 something, and it wasn't that close. I think there was a garbage time touchdown that Wyoming scored. So, why not give BYU credit for demolishing Wyoming and Laramie when Boise State didn't drop because they only won by 4 in Laramie. Again, so that's the first G5 team, Boise State at 16 here, where they're 10th in the college football playoff ranking. Then we scroll down. We have to keep scrolling. Tulane is 30th here on these Massey. Did I skip UNLV? Nope, they're below. Yeah, they're 31st. So Tulane is not in the CFP rankings, but they're the second highest G5 team. But UNLV, they're ranked, 20th by the CFP? They're 31st.
20. Oh, yeah, 20.
20th, yeah. So, they got beat, I think, at home by Syracuse. Their other losses to Boise. They've got some good wins. This is the best UNLV team ever. UNLV had never been ranked in the AP poll, even during a season, up until this season. Their whole entire program history, they had never been ranked in the AP poll. So give them their roses there. But again, based on the conglomerate of 88 different ranking systems, they're not even a top 30 team. And the College Football Playoff Committee says they're number 20. That's weird. Army here, they're 24th by the committee and 33rd by the Massey Composite. And you have to keep scrolling. Memphis is their number 25. And here in the Massey Composite, when they beat Tulane, they jumped 10 spots. But that 10-spot jump only took them to 42nd. So they were 52nd in this Massey Composite before beating Tulane. And but still, the committee ranked them at 25th. And Massey, everything together says they're 42nd. Again, what's going on there? It's sort of weird. And I think the committee just looked at the AP poll and they're like, well, we'll just stick them in because that's where the AP put them. I can't believe they're doing anything else than that, because they're not looking at data and statistics and some of these ranking systems to make their decisions. So.
Yeah, I think that's the frustrating part. Let's go back up to the top of the top 10 or whatever, and or 12 even with this list. But that's what's frustrating, is it's inconsistent, because sometimes they say it's win, sometimes it's strength of schedule or the opponent, sometimes it even looks like, but they're really good losses, and it's all
pick and choose.
Exactly. And so it's hard to know. And that's Brett Yormark was making some comments, I think, today, but just saying how he was told that strength of schedule was going to be very important, but so far that hasn't really been the case, at least for Big 12. And that's the thing, is it seems to not only be inconsistent throughout the season, it's inconsistent who they apply the criteria to.
Exactly.
You
It's
know, you
week to
talk about
week. It's yeah. They
the
quote
you,
what they want to quote when they want to quote it. When he was talking yesterday about Alabama being better than Miami, and they quoted, the record against teams above 500, and Alabama was it 6-1, but Miami was only 4-2. If you include the two teams that beat Alabama that are not above 500, so they don't go into that metric. They lost to two teams that ended 6-6, but those don't get quoted against Alabama because they're not teams with winning records. It's just like how do you leave that out, those two bad losses, and say, oh, they're 6-1 against teams above 500? It's like, well, if you include teams that were 500 or better, then it's 6-3 for Alabama and 4-2 for Miami, which is the same winning percentage.
right.
So,
Well,
and yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, and they talk about quality losses, right? And so Boise State always has this quality loss against Oregon. But if you go back to it, Oregon, this was at the beginning of the season, and I'm not saying Oregon isn't a good team. By all accounts, they do seem to be. But their very first game of the season was against another school from the Gem State, Idaho, who they
Idaho.
struggled with mightily until the
Yeah,
fourth quarter, where they were finally able to pull away, and they won by a whopping 10 points, 24-14. And so then the
in
next
their
week,
FCS
Boise goes
game.
in and Oregon looks to be struggling again. But Boise State all year has gotten so much credit for that win, or for that quality loss.
Yeah,
When
it wasn't a win. That's a Freudian slip there. You sure you're not on the committee? Because the committee, I
um,
think, views that as a win for Boise.
It has been. Well, I was looking at Oregon's page with the score, so there was the W next to it. But
Okay.
yes. So the yeah. Anyway, that's my point. Is just that, what about Idaho? And that game, and that doesn't get talked about. And again, I would say, if anything, it's probably, early season, they're figuring things out or whatever, because they did certainly put things together as it went on. And I'm not saying that Boise State's not a good team too, but for all their ranking to basically be based on that one data point, which was a loss, is just very, very astounding to me. I don't
The committee,
understand.
they love themselves a quality loss.
But then they can ignore Notre Dame's quality loss, or I mean, not non-quality loss. So if it's a
Yeah,
quality loss, they'll talk about it. But if it's a bad loss, like you were just talking about with Alabama, they won't talk about it. But I went through and I was like, well, let's look at what Notre Dame's record is against, I'll even say P4 teams. And so I went through on P4 teams versus BYU's, and Notre Dame, or no, sorry, not their record, but the overall record of the P4 teams that they've played, right? Just say,
okay.
okay, out of the P4. So not only has BYU played an additional game, because they played, um, uh, what is it, 9 in conference and 1 out of conference, Notre
Yeah.
Dame played 8 total P4 schools, and the combined record of all those schools was 80 and 104. So a record of win percentage of 43.5%, whereas BYU's was 114 and 93. So a win percentage of 55.
Yeah.
And so and they played
And
an additional game in there.
exactly. And that's just the record, not looking at home versus away. How many true road games did Notre Dame play this year?
That is a good question.
Three. Three. Three true road games. They had some neutral site games, which, Shamrock Series, and I've been to one of those games that went out at Allegiant in Vegas, and that, they make that into a home game environment. They decide who gets how many tickets. They have all the graphics. They control all the announcing and the rah-rah. So these neutral site games that they played, like Army in New York City and some of these other games, you know, they are not a quote unquote true road tested team. Same thing with Indiana. Indiana only had 3 true road games. They had 8 home games, and then their Northwestern game was officially listed as a neutral site because Northwestern's not playing in their home stadium. It's a sort of a temporary stadium, but I guess you could say they played 4 road games. But come on. I mean, BYU's best win was at SMU. That was a true road game. Um, that that's one of the best wins that anyone in the country has this year. Um, so obviously Georgia's win at Texas is probably the best. But Alabama's win at LSU looked wonderful at the time, but LSU's not ranked anymore. Alabama, sadly, again, I live in Tuscaloosa. I love Alabama, but you know, I forget if I said it on air to you before. I've said it on the program. Most Alabama fans here, they're not feeling like this team is really deserving to be in the playoff. Um, obviously the standard of excellence is higher that Saban set, but Alabama, their record is only 2-3 for road games. And they played 7 home games, as almost all Power 5 teams do nowadays. BYU's got to sort of get on the stick there, but road games are huge. It's much harder to win away from your own stadium than it is at your home stadium. Some of these home environments are just really a great advantage. And that's I don't know if I want to segue that into this quadrant-based system. Do you want to jump into that now? Okay. So this guy Tom, the intern, who's actually a Notre Dame fan, he said, "Hey, what if we created a system that mimicked the net ranking system in college basketball?" And the net ranking is what's been used for, I think, well over a decade to sort of look at seed lines and sort of get a baseline of where teams are. And that you got your quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, and quad 4 loss game record. Mm-hmm. And it really sort of stratifies teams into sort of quad 1 is your best teams, whether it's maybe I forget if it was like the top 6 or 8 teams. It doesn't matter whether it's home, neutral, or away. If you beat those teams, you're going to get you're going to get a bonus there. Let me see if I can increase this even more here. Okay. Well, but yeah, just looking at this again, I hope it's not too small to read there, but I mean, this is just produced 2 days ago, and BYU is in the top 6 in this system, just above SMU, but again, you're rewarded a little more for neutral and away games than you are for home games. And they college basketball coaches feel the same way, that playing at home is a huge advantage. So they're sort of now bolstering their resumes by playing more neutral site games, by going and playing a tough team on the road. If you win, wow, that's an impressive quad 1 win. If you lose, well, most people lose most of their quad 1 opponents games. So it's just interesting to see what came out with this. And then Boise State does decent in this system, but again, they have 7 quad 4 games. BYU has 6 quad 4 games, but where was Indiana? Yeah, if you get quad 3 and 4, which is sort of what in basketball they sort of say, well, how many quad 3 and quad 4 games? That's sort of what's the floor of the team. Are you losing lots of quad 3 and quad 4 games? All of that. Indiana does not have a quad 1 or quad 2 win. All of their wins are quad 3 and 4, according to this system. Arizona State, though, looks stronger. They have a quad 3 loss. That was definitely not against BYU. That would have been their other loss, which was it Texas Tech, I think? Or they had 2 losses. They beat BYU. But yeah, just looking through all this, Bama has a quad 4 loss. I'm pretty sure that was at Oklahoma, either at Oklahoma or at Vanderbilt. But yeah, it's interesting just to look through this system, and we can scroll down into the next tier of teams,
Well, what you were showing, it kind of highlighted the point I was trying to make about Notre Dame and BYU looking at the combined record overall. If you look at these, Notre Dame didn't play any quad one,
Yeah.
and their loss is a quad 4 loss. So anyway,
Yep. And yeah, he awards wins, a certain value based on what quadrant they're in, and then losses are a negative value. Obviously, Oregon never lost any games, so they've got a 0 in that quadrant. BYU, their loss was in quad 3, one of them. I believe that was Kansas at home, and then a quad 1 loss, Arizona State on the road. But again, that was a -5 that sort of detracts from their 22 points they accumulated from their wins, and so they end up with a net points of 17, which places them 6th in the nation. So an interesting system. And again, you look down at these other teams. Washington State is at the bottom, but it just really reveals, are these teams stacking up lots of easy home wins? Is the record really impressive? Again, I think something like this needs to be taken into account, because the committee seems to really care about the number of wins you have, and not really where they came. They don't seem to be factoring that in right now.
well, unless you're the SEC, you can have some extra losses because it's okay, because the SEC is all good, and it's crazy too, because they're also playing, like Notre Dame, only playing 8. Well, Notre Dame's not in a conference, but 8, I think, P4 teams on their schedule generally. Sometimes they'll have a 9th. But
yeah, most of them play an out of conference power team. Like Bama went to Wisconsin this year. I mean, obviously
they have
Georgia
like the
played
ACC
both Georgia
rivalry
Tech
games.
and Clemson. So the SEC's been doing better about scheduling tougher, P5 games, not just at neutral sites anymore, but they're going to places like Penn State, to Wisconsin, but again, that being said, they're only playing 8 conference games, and so is the ACC. They're only playing 8 conference games. You have the Big 10 and the Big 12, who are both playing 9 conference games. The Big 10 sort of avoided things this year by sort of hitting the lottery of all their top teams not really playing each other, and they just have a lot of really, really bad weak teams that are almost guaranteed wins, between Northwestern and Purdue, and Rutgers is a little better than average, Maryland, etc.
Right.
There's a lot of lower mid in the Big Ten, and then there's a few doormats. You don't really have a lot of that in the SEC. You have Mississippi State and Kentucky, which weren't very good at all this year. But even the teams that have been pretty weak in the SEC, sort of stepped it up this year. Vanderbilt, Florida. Weird to say Florida as being one of the weaker teams in the SEC, but it's just been that way for the last few years.
Yeah, I don't think anyone questions that the SEC has depth, but I think, when we talk about depth with the Big 12, it's talked in a way of being detrimental versus the SEC, which it's really all quality depth, which is bizarre to me. Well, it's not bizarre because I understand it. They've got the bigger brands, but going back,
the Big 12 is the only conference in the entire nation that has no team that has double-digit losses. So Oklahoma State, sure, they didn't win a single conference game. They were 0-9. They went 3-0 out of conference, even beating an SEC team, Arkansas.
Yeah.
So that just shows you the strength and the depth of the league, that there are no absolute guaranteed easy wins like a Purdue, like this year Mississippi State, like about a third of the ACC, just really, really weak teams there. So
yeah. To looking at this graphic now, what I think is interesting is one, the list of the teams on here isn't crazy different from what we see in the CFP and the AP poll. The order is and how high or low some of the teams are, but the overall teams. But what's interesting is how quickly it starts turning to red, because even on this first list, you get to it, it starts going light pink here just a little bit. And was it Alabama at the number
Okay,
12?
so
Yeah, Bama. You see
yeah.
that 0.368 is already starting to turn pink, and then that next 13 and down, there's a lot more red pretty quickly on there. So it's just interesting. It goes to show just how I guess accomplished those teams at the top really are.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, look at where the Big 12 teams are in this system compared to, the CFP rankings. BYU, of course, I'm going to quote this one because it's among the best I've seen BYU ranked by any system. But, sixth, Arizona State, 11th. Jumping down here, a little bit of a gap here, but you've got Iowa State at 17th, which isn't far from where they are. I think they're 15th in the rankings. Or is Arizona State 15th and Iowa State 16th?
Yeah.
Even Kansas State here, Colorado. So you got 5 top 25 teams here. So in this system for the Big 12. Yeah, this system doesn't seem to penalize you for the road games, for losses against really good teams. And I think something like this needs to be looked at, mainly because we've got to figure out a way with these imbalanced schedules to not overly reward teams for stacking up easy home wins. I mean, Indiana, again, not a tough schedule at all. Didn't even have any quad 2 games at all. Played one quad 1 game and lost it. They didn't even look competitive. What they get 180, 148 total yards in the entire game against Ohio State. Wasn't even.
What's crazy to this is that because they beat up on all these bad teams, they're ranked high, right? And they did what BYU didn't. They won big, so that does look impressive. But because they beat up on all these bad teams, they're ranked high, which then, if you look at Ohio State, gives them a quad 1 win, when in reality, maybe Indiana wasn't so impressive after all. They're just feasting on lesser teams and took advantage of that. But then that consequently boosts Ohio State record as well.
Positive feedback loop. Just sort of
yes, and that's what's happening with you talked about it too, with the anchoring with the preseason polls of then biasing the polls for the rest of the season, because every movement then is based on where you began and what these expectations are, which is naturally going to favor these bigger brands and the better recruiting. But then also you have they're ranked high, and then they play each other, and so because you continue to bias these big brands, and these big brands and jump in the same conference together, then they play each other, and then you can give them lots of quality losses, as we've been talking about, which is fine. I do think there's good losses. Like, I don't think if 2 really good teams, like you had Oregon, and I grew up in Michigan, so I don't like to say good things about Ohio State, but 2 teams that are good that play each other, and then one loses by a point, I wouldn't really view that too harshly, because one of those teams has to lose. And so I think, that to an extent,
Georgia, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, we got great teams, great players. Someone has to lose. And I see where you're going.
So that's fine. But when they continue to boost these rankings, and then you look at it like, you're talking about these G5 teams, they're almost set up to, like, now Boise State, UNLV is ranked just high enough now that Boise State, even if they lose to them, can say, yeah, but look, it's a ranked team. You know what I'm saying? So it's always going to, in some ways, advantage, and continues to give that feedback. One thing real quick, is just I'm going to switch over just real quick. You talked about BYU rankings, and this is another one from Timothy Turnstone that I came across, but he just showed, look at some of these other, and I'm not familiar with all of these, but strength of record is one we talk about a lot. Kelly Ford is one that's all over, and just pretty consistently at 12, which is lower than what we just looked at with the quads. But regardless, there's a lot of analysis out there and a lot of data, and the fact that it does not seem that the committee's using any of that at all. They like to stick with the eye test is just what's I think having fans go bonkers, because it's inconsistent, and there's no rhyme or reason. Like, give us the criteria that we need to meet, and then we can go out there and meet that. Now, I do want to
Let me quickly share what I put up on my screen here. It's probably really hard to see. Maybe I'll enlarge it a little bit here, but this is the Massey composite, like you scroll up here, 88 different rankings included there. If you hit these little arrows, and it'll show, well, who are your best rankings, and it'll sort of put it at the top here. So, there are still systems, there's what's that, 8 or 9 different systems that have BYU in the top 10, even after those 2 losses. All of them, you scroll across all of them all together, there's, BYU average is 15th, but, some of the lower ones are let me reverse it. You can also see who ranks you the worst. So 39th, some of these are ones you've never heard of, but again, you've got a lot of your predictive metrics like FPI, your Kelly Ford, your Sagarin. I know Kelly Ford and FPI do include some of your predictive metrics, like your either recruiting rankings or historical success. But scrolling down to BYU here, so Kelly Ford and others, just they're around 30-ish on these rankings. So I'll jump off of that and let you go back to where you were going to go.
Oh, no, I wanted to hop back to this. I just want to put a quick caveat in that I'm complaining a lot about how this is impacting BYU. Ultimately, I acknowledge if BYU wanted to get in, we knew that they were going to have to be near perfect to get in. They could probably live with 1 loss, maybe 1 loss, and then a loss in the conference championship, maybe. But ultimately, they didn't have a lot of wiggle room, and we knew that going in. So I'm not saying absolutely.
It's a total double standard. It's a total double standard. A lot of people, even BYU fans, are like, well, you got to win, and you don't win, you're not in. It's like, yeah, we get that. We could have removed all doubt by winning, but are you applying that same logic to Miami? Are you applying that same logic to Alabama or South Carolina? All those teams, except the South Carolina, but South Carolina lost early and lost a lot of head-to-heads. But I mean, Miami finished 2-3 or 1-2 in their last 3 games, like BYU, and they're people are saying, well, that's the first team out was Miami, and by the committee's ranking, that's what they said. But I think I've got a tweet here that compares. I'll pull this up right here. Rewind a few weeks. 9-0 Miami peaked out at number 4 in the rankings, while 9-0 BYU peaked out at number 6. And some people say, yeah, Miami looked great in that process. Maybe they should have been 7-2 with some of the assistance they had from the ACC review booths. But in that Cal game and that Virginia Tech game. But although both teams lost 2 of their last 3 games, it's eerily similar that they both lost a game by 5 points, and they both. I think one of the scores was exactly the same. I think it was a 28-23, just like Arizona State beating BYU. I think that was a score in the Georgia Tech loss that Miami took. But they're similar. I think Arizona State's a little better than Syracuse in the rankings and metrics and everything. And Kansas is a little worse than Georgia Tech, but it sort of evens out. So very similar quality losses. And BYU has a much better win at SMU, way better than anything Miami has. I don't think Miami has a single ranked. Still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It was getting a little distorted.
I think my AirPod just went dead.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's going to limit what we do here, but you getting feedback, or are we okay?
Not yet. It'll just keep going.
Okay. But so both teams lost to similar ranked teams. BYU dropped 12 spots to number 18 for being punished for those 2 losses. Miami dropped 8 spots, and they're complaining about that. They're at number 12 right now, and the last team looking in, but obviously BYU was punished a lot more for similar losses than Miami was. And, what's the explanation there? Especially when BYU, if you put blind resumes next to each other for Miami and BYU, it is, no one chooses Miami. If better strength of schedule, equal strength of record, they're both 10-2. The losses aren't quite as bad. The average team beaten was better by BYU. It's just, but BYU's not even in the graphics of who deserves that last at large spot. Is it Bama? Is it South Carolina? Is it Ole Miss? Is it Miami? And BYU's just not there. It's like,
It's pretty
oh,
much
why?
over.
Yeah, yeah.
Why?
Why?
At least,
At least put us in the graphic. And again, as BYU fans, I'm sorry if I'm over talking. I don't think most of us say, "Oh man, we really earned that. We deserve to be there." But we should be discussed. You know, Miami trip to the finish line just like BYU. Why are they the last team out? Yeah, BYU needs to be in the graphics, needs to be discussed, and you know, I think most BYU fans would be like, yeah, I don't know if we really look like a playoff team. We definitely wouldn't win a playoff. But again, we accomplished so much. We need to be in the conversation, or else it's just blatant bias.
Yeah, and the problem with it is the graphic is right because that based on the rankings from the CFP that they're not considering BYU. So I think the graphic is probably accurate, but that's what's frustrating is that why? Like based on everything that you just laid out, BYU should at least be in the conversation. And talking about teams that, how much they drop after losses. I saw another one. I can't remember what it was exactly or how many spots it was, but talked about BYU dropped, I can't remember how many spots after losing to ASU, who was a ranked team, and it was a close game and on the road. Ohio State was moved down fewer spots by losing to a very middling Michigan team at home and was only able to put up 10 points. And so again, just going back to your point and the double standard, but yeah, you mentioned these graphics. It's like, the needs to win this week. SMU has one loss, and it's to BYU, who's still ranked and playing for the conference championship. They've blown out a lot of teams too. They did what Indiana did. Now Indiana isn't in a conference championship game. They got destroyed by the one good team that they played, and yet should be in. And then SMU, it feels like if they lose to Clemson, that they're not getting put in. And if I were an SMU fan, I would be upset about that. Why would it be a bubble team when you see all of these SEC teams that are being talked about after having more losses and less impressive resumes? So it's just the inconsistency throughout. It's not just BYU, it's just all over the place, and it's hard to get a finger on it, which is why I think it's so important that, to what you're saying, whatever system they come up with now, they need to have a system in place, and it needs to make sense that everyone should be able to understand, okay, these are the criteria by which we're being judged.
Yeah. And what's amazing is, record is so important. We've got several teams that are probably going to end the year ranked very high and in the playoff that have never beaten a ranked team. Now, SMU, they beat a few teams that were ranked at the time, but right now they do not have a single team that they've beaten that's currently in the CFP rankings. Obviously, they can rectify that by beating Clemson. Texas, no teams that they've beaten are currently in the top 25. Notre Dame, their only ranked win right now is number 24 Army, who's probably going to fall out if Tulane beats them, which is, sort of what Vegas is predicting. I think Miami doesn't have a single ranked one. They're probably not going to be in the playoff, but again, how do you get through a whole season and get all the way up in the rankings with never having, and get all that respect with never having beaten a ranked team, and most of the teams not really testing themselves on the road? So interesting.
Yeah, no. So a couple things is, one is how I remember back when everyone was upset with the BCS because they're like, these stupid, whatever. It's whatever, and they just give us a number and we're supposed to go by this. We all can kind of tell this is wrong or it should be a little bit different. And people did not like how the BCS was doing it. And now, so many years later, we're all saying, hey, look, we really
Give us
need
that back.
to get back. I would rather have that. I don't know how we thought at the time, and maybe it was the way the BCS was calculated. Obviously, I think there's ways you can improve it, and there's so much data out there. And you showed all these sources of people who have their own versions of these composite rankings or of these rankings, but is like, I don't know how we thought at the time, oh yeah, give us a committee of people. That's going to be the answer. That certainly won't let politics or anything get involved. That to me is insane.
Yeah, there's no transparency. And you
Right.
listen to their chairman, Ward Manuel, who's a former offensive lineman for Michigan and back in the 80s, and currently their AD, I think for the last 6 or 8 years or something. And it's just all over the place, the things he says. The eye test for this team, the first rankings came out and BYU was undefeated. BYU was way lower than expected. And that was, Greg McElroy sort of, when that was one of his first things that he said is like, whoa, why is BYU so low? And it almost took all that pressure on the committee, like, oh, maybe we need to boost BYU up. And then, BYU drops the ball and takes it out of, puts the ball back into the committee's hand. And we know what the committee's going to do. If they have a chance to punish BYU, they are going to punish BYU. And this is not just this year's committee. It was the committee in 2020. It was the committee in 2021 when BYU, finished both those years in the rankings. That very first committee ranking where I think I've got that right here. Yeah. So this is back in 2020. So the AP poll had BYU at 8th. Okay. Yeah, there you go. And Cincy at 7th. The coaches had the same thing. All the computer systems, so this was Massey back then, only had 52 ranking systems, 5 and 6 for Cincy and BYU. The old BCS simulation had Cincy at 8 and BYU at 8, Cincy at 6, BYU at 8. But this college football playoff, the 13 committee members, Cincinnati at 7th, BYU at 14th. Not a single AP voter had BYU below 13th. But the committee had a consensus of BYU at 14th. It's like, what? And, I freaked out at the time and, this sent out this tweet and even showing, who ranked who where and, sort of looking, this is the BCS compared to the college football playoff rankings at the time, with BYU way down at 14th and by the committee and 8th, which was lower than the AP and the Massey Composite rankings, being at 7th, or excuse me, Massey Composite being at 6th. But yeah, and then the next year, BYU beat all those 5-0 versus the Pac-12 and finished the season 10-2, and still we're pretty much told, well, yeah, you schedule a lot of power teams, but you're not in a power conference, and you need to get in a power conference for us to really take you seriously. And then now we're in a power conference, and the G5 teams are being artificially inflated, and I don't know what is going on, but they are just. The committee does not like the Big 12, and it seems like BYU in particular, because BYU, even though we tied for first, lost the tiebreaker, but we did tie for first in the Big 12 regular season race. Even though we tied for first in a Power 5 conference and have the best resume of any team, lost the tiebreakers, not in the game. Miami, they're saying they should be in, but they're third place in the ACC. They didn't even lose a tiebreaker. SMU's undefeated. Clemson only has one ACC loss. Their other 2 losses are to the SEC, South Carolina and Georgia. And then you have Miami there with 2 ACC losses. So they're a third place ACC team. And everything I've seen, all the different conference ranking systems consistently have the Big 12 as a better conference than the ACC. So how's the team that tied for first for the Big 12 6 spots lower than a team with a worse resume who is in third place in the ACC? It's like, come on.
Yeah, it's really problematic. Slightly off, veering off the complaining. how do you think the conference championship games should be taken into consideration? Because it's an extra data point, and so some people are saying it shouldn't be used against you, but on the other hand, it is a data point, and so the win is going to count for you. So how can the loss not be held against you? What is the answer there? Because you just mentioned Miami, who didn't even get to the conference championship game, could potentially benefit by Clemson losing.
Yeah. I think it should be. You have more to gain than to lose, but I think I think it is another data point. It's part of the eye test. I think of Florida State last year and everyone up in arms that, they won that game and were still kept out. They're 13-0 and still kept out of the playoff. But if you watch that game, Louisville, that was an ugly game and they could not move the ball. And once, their quarterback, Florida State's quarterback went down, they were obviously a different team, and that data point revealed that. Even though they won the game, it revealed that they just did not have an offer. They did not have a quarterback, and they did not want that product in the college football playoff. And I know people were up in arms about that, but I agreed with that. And Florida State has since, got destroyed by Georgia in the New Year's Six Bowl, and then the season where they 3-9 or 10 or 2-10, just a pitiful season.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think all the players decided to play in that bowl game after that, but no, you're right. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of issues to go around, because you look at, okay, the eye test, they use the eye test when it's convenient, and then they use, the resume of what people have done when that's convenient, to get these big brands in. And so it goes back to just basically there needs to be a system, there needs to be something in place, and putting the right teams in, and based on what they've actually accomplished and who deserves it. So I have the same thing pulled up here from Kelly Ford. We talk about deserving.
Yeah. So again, just look who's the most overrated based on this is just Kelly Ford's most deserving rankings, which are this is his ranking that is purely resume based. So he does his predictive ranking, which are his standard rankings, and BYU's down around 30th in that, or I think rose up to nearly 25th at one point, but that's been a hard one for BYU to rise in. But in the most deserving, the resume-based rankings, BYU's done very good. But look at, UNLV, Memphis, 14, 15 ranks higher by the College Football Committee than by his system. I mean, talk about outliers. We got all these, even Boise State, 7 spots higher than again. It's just Army is fairly ranked by his system, but again, who's out here? BYU, South Carolina A&M, LSU. That's some good company to be in. Even Georgia here, 4 spots underranked, Florida, etc. So. Which is interesting because I don't think Florida is ranked by the committee. I wonder how he got a few of these ones figured in there. Because LSU and Florida are not currently ranked by the CFP committee, but they're on this graphic. So either they snuck in there on accident or something. But
I want to show this other one here real quick from basically the same thing. But he's just actually showing where he thinks they should fall. And again, BYU at number 12, similar. Well, as I already showed on the other one, saying that Kelly Ford and as well as some others had BYU at 12. But you see where they are in this most ranking. So I think that's why he has Florida on here. Is I think he had it on here too. No, I wonder this is top 30. So anyway, yeah, but there's a system. I mean, you can have some complaints about any one system, but if there's a system in place, you at least can understand how it works, and it makes sense, and it's a way to be calculated. So, all right. So let me try to take that off there. Oops. Get yours back on here. But all right, so what else have you got for us?
Just a couple more, just comparing Miami, or this is Clemson and BYU. BYU has 3 wins, better than anything that Clemson has, but the committee ranked Clemson ahead of BYU, despite BYU's 3 better wins, and BYU only has 2 losses to Clemson's 3 losses. And yeah, Clemson played some tough teams. They lost South Carolina and Georgia, and who else did they lose to? One other team. But yeah, let's. Kelly Ford does not like the things he's hearing from Ward Manuel, the CFP committee chair. Record versus current top 25 teams, which can be a self-fulfilling prophecy record
Right.
for teams that these are just very subjective, weird measures that they just quote when they want to quote them to justify what they just did. And then the recency bias, they got to figure out something there. I'm conflicted on that, but let's see. Yeah, this is something you just pulled up. I had that ready to go. This is the final CFP resume rankings, where they look at your raw resume on one axis, and then your composite team strength. So BYU does much better on the raw resume. So those are the strength of record, the pure resume bank. We're top 10 team based on resume, and this brings in different systems. But when you look at composite team strength ratings, so these are a combination of efficiency metrics and predictive metrics, which are some of the things that like Vegas uses to predict lines. BYU does worse on those, but he sort of on the scatter plot, there's a general correlation, but this is where he draws the line. And again, I'm trying to, where is Boise at all? Look, Boise's right here. I don't know if that shows up, but it's just above Baylor. And, they're around 30th in raw resume and 25th in efficiencies. But, they're 10th by the committee. They're nowhere near this hashed line. I don't know if my mouse is showing up on your screen, but,
I can see it.
Okay. But some of the other teams that are in the conversation, BYU and Miami are right there, sort of about the same distance from this dash line. But again, BYU is nowhere in the conversation for this at-large spot. So, argue with these what you want, but it's again another data point that shows that Big 12 teams are sort of getting the shaft, being close to the line, with Iowa State here, Arizona State here, and BYU here. Just not really being in the discussion at all for a at-large spot. So, and let me see the last couple here, if they even. Yeah, this is something I sent out a couple days ago about, why is BYU not even in the conversation? Their 2 losses. I think I've addressed some of these things where they outgain both the teams. And then the SMU game, sometimes they say, oh, well, I even on the committee ranking show yesterday, they said that SMU lost early in the year on the road at BYU. It's like, did you even watch the game? They weren't on the road at BYU. BYU went to SMU and beat them. They say, well, SMU's made a quarterback change since. Like, no, they didn't. They always had co-starters. This Jennings is an amazing quarterback. He finished their year last year as the starter because of an injury to Stone. He won them the the AAC championship game over a great Willie Fritz coach Tulane team. He played in the bowl game, and he was co-starter this year. Pretty much they just gave him 2 series each for the first 2 games, and BYU just destroyed Stone on the.
Yeah, he only played
2
2
series. Exactly.
And he went. I think they had negative total yardage in those 2 series. But
yeah,
yeah,
and that wasn't the difference. I mean, if you look at this total yards in this game, I mean, it wasn't a super close game from how the scoreboard was, and it never felt. I never felt like BYU was gonna, truly lose this game, but it was close. But total yardage, BYU 336, SMU 261. I mean, BYU just shut them down, and SMU, if you look at their home scoring and home yardage from last year and this year, I mean, this game is an absolute outlier. It didn't matter who they had at quarterback. That team can move the ball and did it before BYU and has done it since. And Jennings was their quarterback. Look, he threw 32 passes. Um, and they say, well, he's been a lot better since. Like, yeah, so Jake Retzlaff got a lot better too after that as well. He threw 2 interceptions and had a fumble. So it wasn't a great game for Retzlaff either. So that's again sort of. But again, a lot of people have been dismissing either BYU's win or SMU's loss because it was so long ago and because of the quote unquote quarterback change, and then the anchoring bias that I mentioned before. But yep. I'll turn it back over to you and let you tidy up. I think we're going to talk about some predictions.
Yeah, and I was just gonna make that point. You're talking about the SMU quarterback change. Double click that. But Baylor, they also made a quarterback change from who they had to start the season, and they became a better team as well. And so to look at that and say, oh well, Baylor, what was their final record? 8-4. Well, guess what? They also got better, and they really turned it on throughout the season, but they also made a switch. So you can't just pick and choose when you use certain arguments. And then last thing, we beat this point too, not to make a pun here, but we beat the dead horse here. So, but just looking at the overall, there's just other metrics here, and just looking at the total resume rating for Boise State, and their rank is 31st, Arizona State 17, Iowa State 13. And so it's just when you compare all these wins and everything that they have, and Boise, and they just get so much credit for this this quality loss here from Oregon. But anyway, yeah, it's crazy, and hopefully it's something that's addressed. But ultimately, I think it's being used, as you were saying, I think to for the Big Ten and the SEC to ultimately, I don't know, pull away or continue to make changes, or maybe the Big 12 is going to say, hey, we're losing our spot, we're falling behind. Yeah, let's get those guaranteed spots after all, and we'll take the 2 and give the Big 10 and the SEC 4 each and move to 16, and some other systems that just continue to benefit those two conferences at the expense of everyone else. And what's crazy too is that it's really just turning Big 12 fans and ACC fans against each other and against teams like Boise State, when really we should be looking at these other conferences that are like, well, what are you guys doing? Like the Big Ten, you get by playing very few teams. There's not a lot of depth there, very top heavy, and continue to be just the inconsistencies there. So the system's
we need transparency because there's zero transparency. Yeah, they question the chair about, well, this doesn't seem right, or this, what's going on here, but there's no transparency about what they truly value. And it's very obvious to people that they're just picking and choosing what they want to put in who they want. And that, they've got to have some level of honesty and some level of transparency about what they're really valuing and how they're coming up with these rankings, because they're at risk of just alienating a massive section of the country, and just lots of college football fans who love the sport in general. And yes, they love their team the most, but they, I watch all kinds of games. I'll watch it just about any college football game. But yeah, I mean, a lot of us are not going to care after if this plays out year after year, and we're talking about a stack in the deck in favor of the people who already have all the advantages. It's like, that's not, sports are about competition and about who wins and who's deserving. And when it's not fair, it's not sports, and it just turns off sports fans really quick.
Yeah, they're going to find that excluding everyone from, their teams and, being involved, that there's going to be a lot of, like you said, lost interest in that. So it's unfortunate. So let me pull it up here. Let's go ahead and now that we've complained for an hour 15, let's go ahead and make our picks for this week. If I can get it added. Here we are. So here are all the conference championship games on here. I just put them in chronological order from when they'll be taking place. Adam sent me his picks. Now, he did leave off some of them. I'm guessing some of these smaller conferences that aren't really going to be involved with the playoff, and because he's kind of out of touch right now. I didn't have a chance to get those from him, so there's a few blank spots. But let's go through each of these. And Jeff, I'll just give you first say on what your mindset was on each of these, and as we go through. So first, you've got. Oops. Oh, man, let me see here. I don't want to have to scroll through all this. I don't know why it jumped so far. Here we are.
That first one I think was Western Kentucky and Jacksonville State. Hard to go against Big Red, that mascot at Western Kentucky. Weird, creepy mascot, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's actually my reason for rooting against them, is because sometimes I think I've seen him go up in like mascot competitions with Cosmo. I was like, this guy in like a red Grimace costume has nothing on what Cosmo does. So I also went with the Gamecocks. I didn't have a lot here other than kind of what I just said, but they seem to have been on fire. But I honestly have not followed.
Alabama's a football state, and Jacksonville State actually is here in Alabama. A lot of people think it's down in Florida where Jacksonville is, but this is Jack State in Alabama. So. Yep. Give me some Jack State. I think they're slightly favored too, but
yeah, I saw that, and really, I just So don't know there. This one, moving on to the Mountain West, you've got Boise State here, even after everything you said.
Well, they're playing UNLV. Boise State's less overrated than UNLV is by the committee. I think they've got a better team. They're playing on the Smurf turf. And that's a tough place to win. But UNLV may do it. That would provide some interest. But boy, if Boise loses and is still in the playoff, wow, they will not have earned that spot, in my opinion.
It'll be interesting to see what happens, because if they lose, I mean, I'd assume UNLV will be ranked higher, and then they'll be in, but who knows? Because that would be a huge drop for Boise State. So I think the committee would love Boise State to be in because of the brand value that they bring. But Adam also had Boise State, and this is across the board. We all had the Broncos, but their first matchup was close. They have kind of similar results against similar teams in the Mountain West, so I do think this could be a good one. I was tempted to pick UNLV here. I do think probably with Ashton Gentry that Boise State is probably a little bit better, and so I lean that way. But I wouldn't be surprised if UNLV pulled off the upset.
Yeah, that wouldn't be shocking. Boise State's been limping along recently, and now if you look at the final score, some of them look like blowouts, but they've sort of scored lots of points in the last 5 minutes of a few games the last few weeks, and the games were more competitive than the final scoreboard reflected. So they may be they've been hanging on, winning, and just primed to lose. So we'll see.
We will see. It should be a good game, regardless. So moving to the American, who you got here?
Oh, Tulane for sure. I mean, Tulane walloped Navy 35-0. And what kind of offense does Navy run? Something very similar to Army, with the option running attack. So, yep, Tulane. Although they were embarrassed by Memphis, I think they were. And that's the other thing. I didn't talk about Tulane's ranking at 17, way above, where they should have been in last week's ranking before they lost. They were ranked by the committee at 17th, above BYU at 18. That's one reason. That's one of the only reasons BYU moved up a spot is because Tulane lost to Memphis. I'm almost half shocked that Memphis didn't take their spot above BYU somehow. But yeah, I think Tulane's got a better team and is built to stop this. Even though I think they're playing at up in New York, so I don't know if weather's going to be a factor.
It could be. Adam has his Army. He's not here to defend that, and I also went with Tulane. I do think they'll bounce back, but we will see. Okay, the Big 12, one we should be a little bit more familiar with. Who you got here? Well, I clicked early.
Yeah,
So.
I think it's almost a toss-up, although, their best receiver, Tyson, apparently went down out for the rest of the season against Arizona. I think it's still pretty much a toss-up. Maybe Arizona State's favored by a point or two. But yeah, I mean, they've just been on a heater and have, I think the last 3 weeks have jumped out to 21-0 leads within the first quarter or so against, Kansas State, then BYU, then Arizona. They've just been really just coming out of the gates, just really, putting it on teams before they have time to figure them out. And, sometimes they've stayed away and not been caught. So, and my dad played for Arizona State. I got several cousins who have gone there and been there. He played football for Arizona State way back when.
So you had to go with ASU in that one. Yes, I think this is. Oh yeah, that's right. Adam really went against Creighton. He continued to pick teams that are kind of the worst case scenario for BYU throughout. That seems to be a theme for him. But I also went with ASU. Maybe I'm just a little biased because they beat BYU, but I'm also hoping it because they are ranked just a little bit higher than Iowa State. So I think they've a better chance of
jumping Boise.
Yeah, especially if it's a close game or they lose or get blown out. I don't know what it would take, but anyway.
Yeah, say Boise barely wins, but Genty's injured or their quarterback's injured or something, then based on previous years with the committee, that may pop Boise out of the 4 seed.
Yeah. Okay, what about for the MAC? Give us some action.
One of the Ohio teams, Miami, Ohio, or Ohio. I think I picked Miami, Ohio. Yeah. I couldn't tell you a whole lot about these teams. I do watch some of the games, but mostly just the highlights or the key plays on YouTube TV. But yep, can't give you a whole lot of analysis other than.
Well, you are so wrong. It's definitely Ohio that's going to win this game. And if you don't know why, I'm not going to tell you. I don't know. I flipped a coin here. I actually originally had Miami of Ohio and then switched for some reason, and then you picked it, so I'm glad. And so now we got a little bit of difference there. Oh, sorry. So moving to the SEC,
sure.
Accidentally, you got Texas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much, isn't that the only team that beat them this year is Georgia at home. So I think they've got a little revenge factor. I mean, Georgia will have possibly the home ground advantage. It's going to be interesting to see because both these teams are going to the playoff. Georgia's, they're used to going to the playoffs, and how many fans are going to keep traveling week after week after week. It sort of becomes hard on a fan base, but for Georgia, it's local. Texas has lots of fans and a lot of rich fans, so they're probably going to be buying up tickets, and it's their first SEC championship. So, I mean, Sark won't be intimidated by the environment. He's been in that game several times with Bama. So yeah, I've got Texas winning a close one here.
Yeah, I just think Texas is overall given me more reason to believe in them than Georgia has. I mean, all year. I mean, Georgia even struggled against Kentucky. They did have big moments. They did beat Texas, but then again, Texas hasn't. If I remember right, at least up to that point, Texas hadn't really played anyone, so you started questioning Texas. So I don't really know, but I also went with Texas. Pretty sure Adam did too. So another sweep there across the board.
This would represent Texas's only win over a team that finishes in the rankings.
Okay, yeah. So I was right. Yeah, so they've had a soft schedule. So of course they've looked good. So it's hard to say, but
they beat a ranked Michigan at the time. They beat a ranked A&M at the time, but those teams aren't ranked anymore.
Right. Right. So exactly. All right. So moving over to Sunbelt.
Louisiana,
Yes.
the Raging Cajuns.
Uh,
They've just been a solid program for a few years. Even after they lost Billy Napier to Florida, they've still put out a consistent product. They know how to recruit the area. There's just lots of good football players between Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, sort of that Gulf region that they recruit. And yep, I think they just got the edge over Marshall here.
Yeah, there's another one I don't really know. It'd be great to see Marshall come win that, but Raging Cajuns have had a lot of success in the conference, so we'll see. Okay, Big Ten. Does Penn State stand a chance against Oregon?
I think Oregon's going to take it. I think they had their scare against Wisconsin, and Penn State. I know they win a lot of games, but I don't know. They just never really super impressed me. Um, we'll see if Franklin can win the big game. Not a whole lot of history of doing that, but we'll see. But I think Oregon's got the advantage here.
Yeah, this is another sweep. My question is, like, if Oregon just blows out Penn State, I don't see a world where they do, but theoretically that would be an argument to say, okay, Penn State's out of the playoff. But nobody's talking about that. That doesn't seem to be how the committee's thinking at all, because Penn State only has one loss. But again, they haven't really had the toughest schedule, and they went up against one good team and lost. So anyway, we spent an hour 15 complaining about that, so I won't keep going. But anyway, so now the ACC.
Give me SMU. I mean, neither team has a really quality win on their resume. Neither has beat a team that's currently ranked. One of the teams is going to come out of this game with a ranked win finally, and the winner's going to the playoff. The loser, if it's Clemson's definitely out. If it's SMU, is at risk. But yeah, who you got? Or Adam, I guess we'll go him next.
Sorry, I was freezing here, so I don't know if that'll show here. Hopefully it caught all that. But yes, Adam went with Clemson. So again, I think I told you he continued to pick teams.
Whatever's worse for BYU.
Worse for BYU, but
appearance.
I went with SMU. I don't really know. I think that they've looked like the better team. Again, I mean, that's the eye test, but really it's just wishful thinking there, as it would be great to say, yeah, well, we beat them and just kind of strengthen our argument. Not that it'll make a difference at the end of the day, but I guess it's
SMU's been an impressive team down the stretch, and Clemson. Yeah, they played South Carolina well, but that was at home, and they still lost to a fourth, fifth, or sixth place SEC team. So yeah, I think one thing it's been mentioned by other people before, but if this plays out, especially our predictions for the Power Four conferences, what's the commonality between all four of those picks that both you and I have? It's their first year in their new conference.
Oh, yeah.
What for all this beating the chest about who's the best conference, for newcomers to come in, and I am shocked at this, honestly. I think it's sometimes tough for coaching staffs to prepare for all new teams, but apparently it's also tough for the opposing coaching staffs to prepare for the newcomers as well. So yeah, I mean, SMU, Oregon, Texas, and Arizona State, if those are the four winners, that would be a massive storyline for the year.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you're right, that is surprising. Normally you'd think they would take some adjusting, and that was the expectation, I think, for a lot of these teams. But well, maybe not Texas and Oregon as much, but Yeah, certainly very interesting. And I think it goes to show, and maybe it doesn't. I don't know what we can learn from that, but I think something we have seen this season is that there seems to be more and more parity. And I think that is with all the problems that we have with the transfer portal and NIL and the way it's the pay to play nowadays, it has even the playing field, it seems. Now there's other factors, you have Saban leaving, and that obviously impacts Alabama and things like that. So nothing's in a vacuum, but it does seem that there is more and more parity across college football, which is a good thing. So maybe this is a sign of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think even isn't Army just in their first or second year in the AAC? They were one of the replacement teams for.
I think their first year as their first year as a football member. So, or I guess any member, but
they were independent for a while, and then were they in a conference for a couple of years? Were they in Conference USA or so?
No,
I should know
I
that.
think years ago they've been independent for a long time.
Yeah,
if I remember right. So, anyway,
yeah.
Well, very good. We will see how it plays out. Unfortunately, we don't have BYU on there this week. It felt like it was going to be inevitable. I even started kind of looking at tickets and everything so I could go to the game. Alas, I will be here for a friend's Christmas party instead. So now I don't have to miss that. So that's the silver lining of it all. But anyway, well, Jeff, I appreciate you coming on and walking through all this stuff. Seriously, well, first of all, if you made it through this far of our conversation, then you must already be a fan of Jeff's and following his content. But if you haven't, do go follow him on Twitter, and you can continue to get his thoughts on all of the playoff and the rankings and such, and just college football and sports in general. And again, if you made it this long, and you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please do, because we'll continue to put out more and more content like this as we go. And like the video, we appreciate it. And as always, Jeff, go Cougs.
Go Cougs. Thanks for having me on. Love the show, and appreciate watching you through the last few months, and been a fan.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Take care.
All right, take care. Go Cougs.